What you've just witnessed was a hypothetical crime. The carefully planned theft of a valuable cargo, baby chimpanzees. Stolen to order, these animals may have been shipped abroad and ended up in a private zoo or as somebody's fashionable pet. If the criminals had been caught, the charge would have been theft. Had the animals in the back of the van been human beings, the charge would have been kidnap, a much more serious offence. But as it stands, these highly developed animals, our closest living relatives, are regarded in the eyes of the law as mere property, of no more value than the van in which they were travelling. Can this really be right? Good evening. In the next hour and a half in this global court of inquiry, a controversial new idea will be put on trial. Should the law be changed to give our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, gorillas and orangutans, some of the same legal rights enjoyed by humans? The right to life, the right to liberty, freedom from torture. Leading us through the testimony will be two of the country's leading advocates, Robin Allen QC and David Mellor QC. Listening to their evidence will be a jury of 6 public figures. The philosopher Mary Warnock, responsible for shaping the legislation on human embryos. The author Will Self, actor Bill Patterson, Christina Adoni, editor of the Catholic Herald, the Labour MP Dale Campbell-Savers, and family lawyer Eileen Pembridge. Their job is to decide whether this provocative change in the law should be allowed. Each section of the trial will be introduced by a short film. The first of these looks at the behaviour patterns of the great apes. The second deals with the all-important issue of their capacity for language. The third section delves into the hard science and examines the genetic similarities between humans and the great apes. And finally, the court will explore the philosophy or ethics underpinning this issue. But first, both barristers will address the court with an outline of their arguments.
Members of the jury, by gift of God or the luck of evolution, we've been given the power to reason and debate. Though we may disagree at the end of the night, we shall continue to respect each other as individuals with rights to develop our own interests and to be in control of our own destiny. This respect that we have for each other is the very foundation of our fundamental rights, of what we call human rights. But are these rights to be only for humans? Tonight we shall look at the basis for that respect and debate whether it should be extended to the great apes. We give human rights to children, to the aged, and mentally infirm, to the autistic, to the deaf, and to the dumb. I shall argue that what we recognize in common humanity compels us to recognize the special individuality of the great apes, that we should not be limited by the division between our species and theirs. I shall adduce evidence tonight to show that these great apes have this special individuality. They are our very close cousins in evolution, with highly complex social behavior, which we can indeed readily recognize from our human standpoint. I will show that they can reason and communicate, and indeed that they can do so as well as some of the children or disabled humans to whom we accord human rights. We must cross the gap we have drawn so artificially wide, and accord them also a due respect of fundamental rights. In dignifying apes, we dignify ourselves.
Members of the jury, tonight we're using the techniques of the courtroom to try to tease out a narrow but difficult point. No one suggests that apes should be badly and inhumanely treated. As far as this side is concerned, and I shall adduce evidence that we accept that the great apes are emotionally complex, sentient creatures, biologically similar to humans by virtue of recent common ancestry. But neither the similarity nor the differences should be the basis of political action. Apes should be treated humanely in captivity and preserved in the wild because they are apes, and that should be reason enough. Confusing them for humans, I shall show, is zoologically unjustified and indeed undermines the case for righting the injustices that are occurring. The idea that apes are entitled to human rights because they are able to clumsily imitate some of the behavioral characteristics of humans. The basis for respect for the great apes is that they are distinct creatures who have the same right as so many other animals do to be treated with respect and to have their habitats protected. To confuse this with a debate on human rights does not advance their cause a jot.
Years of observation and research into the behaviour of great apes, both in the wild and in captivity, have given us a huge bank of data about their lifestyles. Great apes can live for up to 50 years. Mothers suckle their offspring for up to 5 years, and play is vital to social development. Some apes develop social ties that can last a lifetime, and adults can have very full and varied sex lives. Great apes exhibit many other human-like qualities, such as kissing, holding hands, backslapping, as well as aggression and brutality. But scientists have long held that there are certain abilities that only humans have, key qualities that mark us out as unique amongst all living things. Our ability to make tools, according to the scientists, marked our evolutionary move away from other primates. But now this is under challenge. Some behavioral researchers working closely with great apes believe their animals not only use but make tools when needs must. The ability to recognize oneself as oneself is evidence of a highly developed mental state and has been held up as a unique trait defining the human species. But now this is disputed by those working with great apes. They claim their animals exhibit self-recognition, as well as many other highly developed mental states, such as altruism and the ability to plan for the future. Nobody who's ever spent any time with or even just watched these animals can deny they're clever, intelligent, and alarmingly similar to young children. So, do the old human-animal distinctions still hold up under scrutiny? Or are we being forced to reconsider our belief in our own superiority? Robin Allen's first witness supporting the proposition is recognised as the world expert on chimpanzee behaviour, Jane Goodall.
Dr. Goodall, you are an internationally acclaimed expert on chimpanzee behaviour. I think you've recently been appointed a companion of the British Empire in relation to your work in that field. You're the scientific director of the Gombe Wildlife Research Institute in Tanzania. And I believe you've been studying chimpanzees now for 35 years.
Correct.
What have you been able to discover from your research about the minds of chimpanzees?
Most fascinating things. It's quite clear from observing the chimps in the wild that they're using their minds very actively all the time because of their intensely complex social structure. They're continually having to make decisions, who to travel with today, what to eat, where to go. And in addition to that, we find examples of tool using and tool making behavior in the wild, which of course at one time was thought to be a distinction that set us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom.
Are you able to say whether these chimpanzees you've seen can plan for the future?
In as much as it's planning for the immediate future, like suddenly getting up from a rest, looking around, going over to a clump of grasses or twigs, preparing a tool, and setting off to a termite mound or an ant nest that may be absolutely out of sight and quite a considerable distance away.
To what extent do you, or have you found that they can have what we might call emotional responses to their children, to their parents, to their siblings?
If you watch a young chimpanzee playing and compare it with a young human child playing, if you see them when they've gone on a long journey and suddenly found wonderful food, also a young chimpanzee who loses his or her mother will show signs very similar to clinical depression in humans, signs which we describe as grief.
Do you feel happy in describing it as grief when you see something like that?
I feel happy in describing it as grief merely because we can lay out the clinical symptoms that underlie that grief, and we see that it's very much the same as in humans. And if it's described as grief in humans, I have no hesitation in describing it as grief in chimpanzees.
Dr. Goodall, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Goodall, let me make it clear, I don't think there's anyone here participating in this debate who doesn't admire tremendously the work that you've done. The issue I have to take with you, you understand, is on the narrow but important point as to whether the behavior that you have observed in chimps and the manner that you have written it up indicates that these are animals sufficiently akin to human beings to be afforded human rights, as I know you believe that they should be.
Well, I believe that they are sufficiently like us in a sufficient number of ways that some of the rights that we're describing as human rights, because we ascribe them to humans, can be offered also to them.
Your work, though respected, is of course controversial for one point which I have to put to you, and that is that right from the beginning of your work with chimpanzees, you have invested them with human qualities, human names. You are one of the most pronounced exponents of what some would denounce as anthropomorphism, the sentimental desire to impute to animals human qualities.
I've no sentimental desire to impute anything to anyone, and the method that I've followed and tried to be quite rigorous about is observing, writing down, having empathy, yes, because they are so like us, but never making any written statements about those feelings until they have been tested and tried through repeated observation.
You know, you, by dint of that charming toy there, have obviously made a huge emotional investment in your chimps. Do you think that blurs your ability to see things with the scientific detachment that's needed to make this rather delicate judgment as to whether apes manifest sufficient signs of human feeling to actually be drawn within the human family, such that we are to consider ourselves as merely being the third chimpanzee?
Well, no, and I don't consider ourselves a third chimpanzee as such. But I think the point here is let's leave the behavior for a moment, which is so obviously like ours. Let's go a little bit inside, not into the genetics about which I know nothing, but the structure of the brain and central nervous system that is so uncannily like ours. And let's look at some of the incredible performances of captive chimps in addition to the similar, I mean, there's the family bonds that last through life, a lifespan of 50 to 60 years, the fact that there's a long childhood dependency, as in our own species, the fact that learning plays a very important part in the acquisition of adult behavior, cooperation, true altruism, which we've observed in the wild. These are the things upon which I'm basing my claim that chimpanzees are enough like us.
But what you're saying is that animals should in effect be greater beneficiaries than humans of this, because you're saying they should have rights, but you're not suggesting they should have responsibilities. You're not suggesting any level of criminal responsibility, suggesting that at root you don't really think that they are sufficiently like humans to be treated as humans.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm suggesting that in certain respects, some of the rights which we accord to each other as human beings should be, by nature of their close similarity to us, also extended to the apes.
Should an ape ever be punished for a crime?
Absolutely. People do punish them.
But should
I mean,
that
we have a
should that
rogue
be
male
lawful?
at Gombe, and none of us like him at all, and I would love to punish him. I can't, but I would like to.
Right, thank you very much.
Opposing Jane Goodall's interpretation of chimpanzee behaviour is David Mellor's witness, research psychologist Dr. Celia Hayes.
Celia Hayes, you're the senior lecturer in psychology at University College London, and I think that your research interests include the nature of scientific investigation.
Yes.
Do you believe that there's anything sufficiently distinctive about the behaviour of apes, either individually or socially, that actually entitles them to be considered more akin to human beings rather than a more advanced part of the animal kingdom?
No. As a comparative psychologist, I've scrutinized hundreds of reports of chimpanzee behavior and compared them with those of other animals, rats and pigeons and ferrets and so on. And through that scrutiny, I've found no reliable evidence that chimpanzees' minds are more like those of humans than are the minds of other higher animals, vertebrates. Most of these claims about the complexity, the psychological complexity of chimpanzees, are based on studies where the animals are simply watched doing what comes naturally to them in the wild. Their spontaneous behavior is observed. And it's very easy under those circumstances to project onto them human attributes, human emotions, and so on. What you need to do to really check what's going on in their minds is to look at them under a variety of circumstances, some circumstances which are novel to them. And that kind of systematic study has very seldom been conducted with chimpanzees. And when it has, it's tended to suggest that what was thought to reflect complex thinking probably doesn't. If you just look at traffic lights during the rush hour, you might think that they were very complex sorts of machines. They appear to be able to see the traffic, to count the cars waiting in different directions at the junction, to make decisions about which route should be allowed to go ahead at any given time. If you go back at 4 o'clock in the morning, you will find that they're really not very complex pieces of equipment at all. They're holding up cars when there is nothing coming in the other direction and so on. There's a simple mechanism responsible for what looks like complexity.
Dr. Hayes, thank you very much.
Dr. Hayes, I want to pick up on that last point. You seem to be saying that Dr. Goodall has seen a great deal but understood very little. Is that what it comes down to?
She has seen a great deal and probably understood a great deal about what the animals are doing, but watching spontaneous behavior alone is not sufficient to sort out what or how they are thinking.
But the problem that I have with this, and I suspect perhaps our jury will have, is that surely as children and adolescents, the way in which we learn to understand our peers and our parents is by watching and observation and seeing how our parents and our peers react.
Oh no, we're also told a great deal. We learn a language in which there are words, the word thought, feeling, hope, wish, and quite possibly what we learn about thinking is largely through language.
But we've heard also, haven't we, from Dr. Goodall, that she has seen these chimpanzees communicating, showing emotions one to another. The fact that they don't use words is not particularly significant, is it?
But you see, I don't think whether an animal is thinking in a certain way is something which is visible from the outside, as it were, with the naked eye.
But I'd like to suggest that your viewpoint is one of the skeptical scientist. You aren't someone who's actually worked with these primates in a hands-on way.
I've worked with other animals in a hands-on way, but I have greater objectivity, perhaps, when it comes to comparing chimpanzees, humans, and other animals, because I've scrutinized the reports of others and I don't have an emotional investment.
Are you accusing Dr. Goodall of having obscured her rational appreciation of what's going on by having too emotional an involvement with her work?
I'd imagine it would be almost irresistible. I'm sure if I had been involved for such a great length of time with a group of animals, I would experience the same emotional attachment.
So we have a conundrum. You don't look at the primates and feel confident that you can say that they don't have thought processes like humans, and you criticize those that do look at the primates and work closely with them because they become too emotionally involved and don't understand what they see.
I would recognise Dr. Goodall and others who observe chimpanzee behaviour as authorities on behaviour. But it seems to me how an individual thinks is not something which is visible, as it were. But when it comes to policy making, I think we should look a little closer.
Yes, and we can look and see how appropriate it is in a particular context.
Yes.
Dr. Goodall, who is the most famous and indeed the most experienced observer, thinks that it is appropriate. You don't have that experience. You can only criticise her from the point of view of the reviewer rather than the researcher.
I criticise quite specifically claims about what is going on inside the head. I would not dare to criticise the observations of what these animals are doing. She is the absolute authority on that.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes.
Children and youth